What do you do now, by the way, all day long?
Me?
Yeah. No, I'm talking to, yeah, you. What do you do now all day?
I write my show. I've got the number one rated show on our network. So I've got a studio about 20 feet away from me, a full blown studio. You know, they spent about 100 grand to put a studio in my house. So I write my show. It takes about 3 hours to write it, and then I do a couple of TV things for the network to kind of build up a little bit of a following into my show, and then my show goes live coast to coast, 12:30 to 1:30.
Did you ever think you were going to be a media guy? I mean, when did that happen? It's just,
I don't know. That'll be part of this. I mean, when the floor started to close, I started to think maybe I should do it full time. I mean, a lot of people said, a lot of people gave me some confidence and some tips, and I mean, now yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
go back to your time at Boulder. Did you do any media there at all?
No, I didn't. I didn't do any media until I got on the floor of the Board of Trade, and there's a small. Well, it's not small. It's a huge publishing company called Meredith Corp. They do like Better Homes and Gardens. They have a ton of magazines underneath there. But anyway, they also own Successful Farming Magazine, and their editor had a booth on the floor of the Board of Trade. And they needed somebody once a week on a Wednesday to talk into an iPhone, while somebody was filming it, to give them an update of what happened during the week in the pit. And so they chose me to do that because I was wearing the black and white jacket that my dad used to wear. And one thing led to another. And the guy that was doing it, the editor for Successful Farming Magazine, owned by Meredith Corp, and that's Meredith, Meredith, they're big. He said, I used to do TV in Des Moines, Iowa. You'd be really good at this. You should go up to the Board of Trade and see if they'd like to use you. Well, I went up to in the bond room as I walked over to the bond room, and after a long flight of stairs up, the Chicago Board of Trade has a media center where they've got about 4 or 5 cameras, and you can sit in front of each camera, and 5 guys can be doing hits on CNN, CNBC, Fox, and the likes. And there's a guy that runs that. His name's Alex, and it still is Alex. And I said, Alex, I'd be interested in being one of your speakers, to report on what's happening here for Bloomberg or whomever wants to hear it. And he says, we got 100 guys, Shellady. That's all I can take. Forget it. I don't need you. So I turned on my heels and said, okay, I get it. And I was walking down the stairs, and at the same time, a guy was walking up, literally, and he walked in and quit. And so Alex ran out of the booth, screamed down as I was walking down the stairs, hey, do you know anything about lumber? And I knew nothing about lumber, but I thought this is my chance. I can't say no, right? So I said, yeah, I know lots about lumber. He says, all right, can you get in booth number 3? You're going to go on Bloomberg in 5 minutes. So I hurriedly got into the booth, and our phones were pretty good back then too. So I could pull up a chart of lumber. I could pull up what lumber prices were trading at, just enough that I could last 90 seconds on Bloomberg. And then after my Bloomberg interview, Bloomberg called Alex and said, okay, that guy's good. We can use him. And once Alex got the confidence in me, slowly but surely, they asked me to do more and more stuff. So by 20, it took me about 6 or 7 years, but by 20, I don't know, whatever it was, 2015, 2014, I was the number one guy. I was doing everything. I was the number one guy at the Board of Trade. So um, it was a lot of fun, and I knew that maybe that could be something I could do once these pits went away because of technologies. And here I am. I mean, I wasn't sure how I would get into it full time, but I was offered a position down here in Nashville to be an anchor for finance TV, and I said I'll take it if I can do my own show. And they said, yeah, sure, which you think is a lie. But 6 months after I was down here, they said, okay, it's time to do your new show. Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
And so they were lucky too. They got to hire me at my normal anchor salary, and they've got a new show out of it that they didn't have to buy. Usually they have to buy those shows, right? And then they try to make up the money with advertising. But it's 100% all organic. So it worked out. And so that's led to other things. So now I do a ton of speaking engagements. I've been able to parlay it into something, back to making the money that you used to make while you're on the floor. So,
Did you happen to ever meet Rick Santelli?
oh yeah, I know Rick. Sure.
Yeah,
Now,
okay.
I would have liked to have aspired to bend him. He's on CNBC. Um, And I used to do a lot of CNBC. I did CNBC when I was in London the last time between 2015 and 2019. But CNBC doesn't like the cow jacket. It's not business-like enough for them. CNBC tries to think that they're going after the more professional trader. I think Fox goes after the more, the mom and pop and a broader spectrum of the retail trader. So they put up with the cow jacket a little bit more. But Fox, I mean, the CNBC, I was on with Joe Kernan and Carl Quintanilla and the likes, and they dropped me after a while because they didn't like the cow jacket. But Fox, sometimes people do say, "We'd love to have you on, but you can't wear the jacket," and I just have to say no.
Santelli I shared an office with him there for years, and he started doing like a report on the commodities for radio stations along the eastern seaboard, and that's how he got his break into CNBC. Like you would have never thought he was going to be that media guy. It just wasn't part of the plan, and it kind of wasn't part of his DNA. We're talking to Scott Shellady. Shellady, 1988, you come out with a finance degree out of University of Colorado at Boulder. We know where you are today, but when you came out of that university, playing football, getting your finance degree, you were coming out after the crash of 87. I was on the floor in 87, and I know there were people coming from everywhere looking for jobs just to take a $9,000 a year runner job, and they had full degrees. You couldn't find a job anywhere. What was your experience like?
Yeah, that was exactly it. While I was going to the career counselors at Colorado Boulder, I got a couple of plane tickets to California and Arizona interviewing for jobs. They were they were stockbroker jobs, and if they weren't 100% commission, it was horrible, horrible, horrible salary. We'll teach you, and then on your way. So I thought at the time, my dad and I were very close, and I had a younger brother that he had made it very clear that he wasn't really going to be going into this business. My sister didn't have an aptitude. She's 4 years younger than I am, or 5 years younger. So I thought, you know what, maybe this is an opportunity for me to get, go see what dad does, get it out of my system. So in 25 years, I'm not kicking myself thinking I shoulda, woulda, coulda. So I came back to Chicago for 1 year, and I got a job. I mean, I don't know if you could say it's a job. They were paying me 125 bucks a week. It was like 7 grand a year, and I had a finance degree. I showed up with suspenders and the wire rimmed glasses, just like somebody out of that Gordon Gekko movie, Wall Street. And the only thing that they offered me that nobody else did, besides 125 bucks a week, was that they were going to teach me how to trade options. And they actually had a course you had to pass, midterms and a final. And once you passed all that, they would actually put you in the pit and back you. And so I thought, well, I mean, if I'm going to learn this business, this is the best way to do it. They're going to pay, basically, they're paying me to learn. So I got a bunch of other jobs. I was a night, I bounced at America's Bar in Chicago a long time ago. Somebody might remember that. And then I parked cars at Harry Caray's. That's still there, I think. I broke cement on the weekends. I did everything I could to try to make extra money. But these people were actually teaching me how to trade, and it turned out to be a good decision. So I wasn't quite sure I was going to stick with it. But then something happened in our office where uh, they were sending a kid over about my age, maybe a year older, to London to open up our offices there. And man, I really wanted to travel. I don't know why, but I had a big travel bug. And so I went up to the owners of the firm, and I demanded a meeting with them at 23 years old and said, I wanted to be that guy. How come he got to go? And they explained to me that he'd been with them longer than I had been, and he had a better pit. Now he knew he was trading, and they needed a trader. And I just said, well, look, if it happens, if there's another spot, I want to be the next to go. They said, all right, well, you prove yourself, and you'll be the next to go if there's another spot. Well, there wasn't going to be another spot really, but what did happen was he blew out, and he was charging stuff to the corporate Amex that he wasn't supposed to be charging. So they fired him. And I got a call one day on the floor when I was trading corn options. I was losing money. I wasn't making very much money. I mean, maybe making a little bit of money, but I was struggling. But because of my willingness and my aptitude and my attitude, they said, okay, you're going. And so I had to come home, and I hadn't spoken to my wife about it at all. I was a newlywed at the time. I was only married about 3 months. And they said, and I said to her, we're moving to London. And after she got over the initial shock, she was excited. But then when I went back to work the next day, they said, no, you're moving to London. You have to prove that you're making money. Then we'll send your wife over a couple months later. So that's how cheap things were back then. But that's how I got started. And then while I was waiting to go through the process to get my membership in London and get all I didn't even have a passport. I started to learn how to trade very well, and I took to trading options, and I started to make some good money, and I got my confidence, and they were happy with me. So um, it's crazy, but at the age of 24, they sent me to London to open up their offices there, and the office was open because the guy they just fired. But I had to go down to the exchange. It's called the Life Market, LIFFE, London International Financial Futures Exchange. We had a clearing arrangement. They had a desk there ready for me in our little office, and by myself at 24 years old, no cell phone. I had to figure out a place to live, and start trading Bob Collins's money from Roosevelt Collins. He was my backer. Bob took me in under his wing. I'll be forever grateful for the opportunity. That's where I got started. So I was there from, I think, 1990 or just before till 2002. Came back to the States for a little while, and then went back over in 2015 to 2019. But I got into the business to get out of the business. I wanted to scratch the itch to make sure it was nothing that I would have been, shoulda, woulda, coulda. And I thought, might as well get it off the list now, and then maybe you want to go be a stockbroker or something else. So once I got on the floor, one thing led to another as far as a backer and the education and teaching me how to trade, because they had a pretty structured educational class that it taught me a lot. And that's where I learned. That's exactly what happened. That's exactly where I learned how to trade. So I kind of made my own way. There really wasn't a spot open. I just kind of shoehorned myself into spots because it was such a difficult time after the crash of '87. Jim, you were trading through it on the floor. I mean, you had to kind of make your own way. There wasn't anybody that was going to give you anything. So it was an exciting time, but it was also really tough because I had to work 4 or 5 other jobs to make sure that we could keep a roof over our head.
Yeah, that's not an. I mean, that was a lot of people. I remember one of the guys he was actually turned out to be one of the biggest traders in the bond pit was still working in the fruit section at the local grocery store because he was having the aberrations in his income and he wanted to make sure that he'd get some sort of paycheck. But it was kind of crazy times. Buried in there, you talked about not being able to take your wife to London because they wanted to wait a couple of months. I could see how that would be. But so I mean, you already had a wife at the age of what, 22, 23? How old were you when you got married?
20. I was 23 when I got married.
And where would you have met your first wife or?
I met my first wife at University of Colorado, and we were dating while I was there. But she graduated 18 months ahead of me, and so she got a job in Chicago and came back and lived with my parents while I was still back at Colorado as the president of my fraternity. So my girlfriend was living in my house in my bedroom back in Chicago while I was still trying to finish up my finance degree. And so when I finally got out, she had gotten a place to stay in Chicago. I got a place to stay right around the corner. Of course, back then in 1988, my mother was not too keen on me moving in with my girlfriend, so I had to have a place of my own, of course, with my own overheads. But yeah, and so the best part, the best part of that story is yeah, we were married. I went over to England without her. Um, and Margaret Thatcher, get a look. Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister. I mean, I'll never forget this. And because our firm was so new, trading the new products over in Europe, in London, I had all the same software that they taught me on and all the classes they put me through. And my wedding anniversary was October the 7th. I'll never forget. That was going to be a Saturday. I think it was a Saturday. And the Friday before, so the day before, the 6th of October, I had accumulated a little bit of a position, nothing too crazy. I think I was trading in August through October, so my position wasn't really too big yet. Um, but Margaret Thatcher, and there was a guy that was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is the same as our Fed chair, and his name is John Major. He ended up being prime minister after Margaret Thatcher. He was the money man. He was they're basically their Fed chair. And everybody was expecting. I was trading short sterling, which is like euro dollars here in the States. Everybody was expecting them to cut rates, and they were expecting them to cut rates by, I don't know, whatever it was, a quarter or a half. But anyway, whatever they cut rates by, whatever the rate move was, is double what we thought it was going to be. And what that meant was my position. It was a Friday afternoon, and I looked at my position, and I looked at we had an analyzer which analyzed your position, showed you your profit and loss, and I think maybe it was raised rates. It doesn't matter, but it was an abject market move, and I had to hedge into the market. A lot of futures against my position. The bell rang, and I totted up my losses, and basically I had blown out. I was done. My position at the time, I think, cost me about $100,000. I don't know, something like that, maybe 75 to $100,000, of which I didn't have any of it, and it wasn't going to be enough for Bob Collins to call me back, like bring me back home. So it looked like their little experiment about we wanted to make sure you could prove yourself was probably not a bad idea. However, I had a few friends that saw my position and knew how I traded, and they're English, and they're still my friends to this day. They kept on looking at my book saying, I don't know how you lost that much money on that move. That doesn't look right to us. That doesn't look right to us. Well, I didn't really have the opportunity to stick around because I had booked a long weekend away in Wales in the Brecon Beacons to go paragliding. Those kind of oblong parachutes where people kind of traverse back and forth on a mountain cliff edge, where there's a big breeze. And
Excuse me if both Adriana and I kind of look at each other wondering you paragliding is
yeah,
just it's a tough visual, but go ahead.
there was another guy that did it with me that played for the Chicago Bears, believe it or not. He was over there. I don't know how I got hooked up with him. But anyway, we went out there for the weekend. And, it was like an all inclusive thing where you took a train, they picked you up at the train station, they brought you to this pub, and we had a bed and breakfast above the pub. And that's where they taught you how to paraglide next Saturday morning. But of course, you get there Friday, and I think I've blown out. I think I'm done. I think my career's over. I'm just going to have a good time. And I knew my wedding anniversary was my first wedding anniversary was on the Saturday, I think. But there's no cell phones and there's no really good way to communicate. I mean, if you want to call the States from a pub in the middle of Wales, literally in the middle of nowhere, you would have had to have had the biggest sack of pound coins to put through the machine, right? And I didn't have any of that. So I just thought at the time I might just call her when I got back to London on Sunday night, knowing that was going to get me in trouble. And probably if we were still married to this day, she'd still be angry with me about it. But anyway, um, so I thought I was done. I was kind of depressed. So I had a few beers on Friday night. I had a lot of beers on Friday night to try to, make myself have some fun. Saturday, I got up. I did the paragliding course. I was paragliding all day Saturday. Then we hit the pub hard again. And then on Sunday, I got on a train and came back to London. And then when I got back to my flat in London, probably around 7 o'clock on Sunday night, a lot of messages beeping on my phone, of which obviously you can imagine a few of them were my wife. So I quickly called her, and she said, something's wrong at work. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, they came in, they called me on Friday because they couldn't get a hold of you and said that you had blown out and that you're going to have to come home. And I said, yeah, that was going to be part of my happy anniversary call. And she said, well, they're looking for you. And so I said, I'll call them now. And I called the office on a Sunday, and they were there, which is never good. And they said to me, all right, Shellady, what do you know? And I said, well, I lost, X amount of money. And they're like, yeah. And, my positions showed me, that I was long 170 futures. So I squared up. I did everything responsibly, I squared up. sold 170 futures right before we went home, and I'm all flat. I just know that this move was unexpected and it really cost me. And if you want me to come back, I understand. And they're like, well, are you sitting down? And I said, yeah, why? And they said, well, we have a massive apology to say. I said, what? He says, well, we sent you over there with the wrong program. I mean, what do you mean? We had the exchange rate wrong, so we had it multiplied times 10. So you lost $7,500. That's 75 grand. And which to me, I almost cried. I mean, it felt, I mean, you know how it is when you thought you lost money and you didn't jump. Even if you lost a little bit, you're like, that's a winner. I was so relieved because I didn't want to be that guy that blew out, right? So I was like, I did have some friends of mine that looked at my book and said that there's no way I could have lost that much money, but our analyzer said I did. And the accountant of the firm says, yeah, well, so that's the good news. I said, yeah, but I have one problem with that. I mean, his name at the time was Frank. I said, Frank, I got a problem with it. He says, why do you have a problem? You've got new life. You don't have to be sent home. There's no shame. You can go back in the pit and trade on Monday. I said, yeah, but remember, part of my story was I flattened my position going home. I sold 170 futures. I should have only sold 17. If you're telling me what is true, everything's multiplied by 10. And he went, you're right. He's like, so you're short 153 futures right now. I said, yeah. So I know I'm probably losing some people with the market talk. Jim, you'll understand. But so I didn't sleep that night. Went into the next morning. The market opened up about 30 ticks lower, Jim. I made 100 grand, and I ended up being up about 110 grand on the whole thing after 2 days, Friday and Monday. I mean, unbelievable. And so I was able then to rent a nice flat, and they sent my wife over the next week. She was over for my birthday, October the 15th. She promptly saw the flat I rented, which I thought was the best thing since sliced bread, and she started bawling her head off because she thought it was horrible. And that's how we started off our married life in London. But yeah, I thought for a 4-day period there, I thought I blew out in more ways than one. But they owed me a big apology in the way we went. And so that was the beginning of my trading. And I was there doing that from 1989 or 90 to 2002. And that's like being there from the age of, say, 23, 24 to 34, 35. So you meet a lot of people in your professional life at those ages, and you meet them when you're out drinking, and you're with them when they meet the girl, and all of a sudden that girl's their wife, and then 3 years later they have 2 kids, and so I have a ton of friends over there that I've known them for since 1990. What's that? 32 years, 35 years. And they've got kids that are 33 years old. It's amazing, but it was an unbelievable opportunity. The guy before me, quitting and getting fired and having charged, suits and ties and clothes to the corporate Amex. They got rid of him, and I had the opportunity to be right in the right place at the right time. And then I thought I blew out, which is another crazy story. Our risk manager did call me, and a couple of weeks after it all happened, and said, "So now, a lot of times the best traders in the world have blown out and came back once they know what it feels like to blow out. They end up being better traders." He says, "So you got the benefit of blowing out, but you didn't have to worry about losing the money." I said, "Thanks." But I had a heart attack along the way. So yeah, I mean that's a crazy, crazy story, and it's true. I thought I was done for, and I didn't really want to call anybody on the weekend of my anniversary because I was just so depressed about thinking that I'm gonna have to go home in shame. They sent me over, and I was only there for 3 months before I lost it all. But it was a pretty crazy experience. Put a little bit of a scar on my heart, but that's so sometimes those things work, and that's where then now you're hooked. Now you're in the business. Now you like it, and then plus you're in London, and so we got to I was young. I was in for my 20s. I got to travel all over Europe multiple times, and so it was just a great opportunity. And I was really fortunate because we made a little bit of money trading, and we were able to travel Europe when we weren't 85 years old with a walker and a cane, spending our retirement money. We were having a blast going to all these different countries every weekend. I don't know how long it took. I mean, how many years we did that. And then finally, when we got something done, sick of traveling, we ended up having a child. So it was amazing. And um, I forgot. I actually forgot about that blowout story. But I know all the players now, and I remember sitting down on my flat that I thought was so fantastic. My wife hated. But yeah, I mean, can you imagine that your computer analytics about your position that you're trading is off by a factor of 10? So unbelievable.
If you guys, we did probably lose you a little bit on some of the hedging. So you buy an option and then, you buy a
Right.
call and then you sell a bunch of futures to make it delta neutral. And he evidently overhedged by a multiple of 10. And it could have gone the other way. It could have been a $300,000 loser, but the market went his way. And I think you're telling this story to a guy who blew out twice. So, I mean, everybody's, there's a bit of PTSD to the whole thing, but
Oh,
it's very entertaining and it's not uncommon. A lot of people got a big break one way or another. He's Scott Shellady. This is the What Makes the Cow Guy Cry podcast. So, just to kind of finish up here today, Scott, you kind of you and the first wife got tired of traveling and had a child. And what year was that?
we had a daughter Chloe. She was born in 1997, so we had been there about 7 or 8 years before she finally came around. And that's another little bit of a story in itself. My wife had trouble getting pregnant, and had we been living here in the States, it would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars in care to try to get her to be able to have a child. But one of the great things about being over there at that time was, I was able to take advantage of the national health system, where what we were charging hundreds of thousands of dollars for, I got basically for free. And so she had to go through some procedures to be able to get pregnant, and she did. And we were blessed, and we had a baby girl in August of 1997. But if that would have been the case here, it would have cost a ton of money. I don't know how much the insurance would have paid for, but that is one upside with the national health system. A lot of people are. It's in the news now about our healthcare here and Obamacare not really working out like folks thought it would. But I'll say that in England, they've got a national health system that you get taxed. It comes out of your taxes, and maybe another a podcast would be how you get taxed be living over there. But you do pay for healthcare in your taxes, but it's not as much as we pay on a monthly basis for say a family of or 3 or 4 people. You're pushing 3 or 4 grand for that. But they do spend about 40% of the money in national health on bringing people into the world. So birth and making sure everybody's comfortable, the mothers are comfortable. The mothers might spend 3 or 4 nights in the hospital. Here they kick you out after a few hours. And then they spend about 40% of their money in their budget on you exiting the world in a dignified, painless manner. So they spend 80% of the money that they take in on taxes for health system on bringing people into the world and ushering people out of the world. And then there's that middle 20%, which is really what gets the bad press, and it should, because it's not right. But if you blow your knee out, or you got a sprained ankle, or you tear some ligaments or something that's not life threatening, that could be, you get in line to see a doctor, and that may take, literally, without exaggerating, 6, 12, maybe 18 months before you get seen, and then maybe ultimately have surgery for. The surgery's free, but you have to go around with a limp for 18 months before you finally get it taken care of. So that's the problem. That middle 20%, when you don't have a life-threatening problem, and the way that manifests itself is if you've got a child who can't hear very well. It's not life-threatening, but it impedes their learning in school, because if they're not sat right in the right place, it hurts. So that really starts to be the bad part of national health, or single payer, where you've got the government that really doles out the health care. But we were lucky, and we got great health care with them helping us with our daughter. But I had it's a shame what's happened in London and England with the free speech and the likes over there. But it was a blessing to be able to get out of this. That's going back to maybe take a full circle, Jim, real quick. So ultimately, in the end, I was in my father's his business, right? I was in London doing the same thing my dad did here. I called him every day when I was in London too. We talked about the markets every single day at 7:30 his time, 1:30 mine. And at first, before I went over there, I really actually wanted to go to London because I wanted to get out of my father's hair. I was angry. I was jealous. I was working 4 or 5 other jobs to learn how to trade options. I was in the middle of the corn options pit in Chicago, not really making a lot of money, if anything. I was having to support myself with all those other jobs, and there was my dad, making a gobs of money, not working nights, not working weekends, going out to our farm, relaxing, having a fun time. And it really grated on me, and it was a great lesson. And he says, "I'm just not going to help you. You need to learn it on your own." And so when the opportunity to get out of Dodge and go to London came up, I grabbed it because I just wanted to get away from him. I loved him so much, and he was such a big part of my life. But when I was at that age, at 23, 24, I was really angry, and he knew it, and he knew the best thing for me to do was to go off and do it on my own and come back after I'd made my own hay. And that's exactly what happened. And so another great experiment. I don't know I don't know if I could do that with my kid, seeing my kid work 5 jobs and struggle and struggle and struggle. But he said, you got to do. So I left Chicago to kind of get away from him, and I got really sick and tired of being called, my last name is pronounced Shellady. I don't really care if you mispronounce it, but when at that time in my life, when everybody was, labeling me as his son, and I didn't want to be his son because I was so angry and working 5 jobs, and he did nothing. Every day that I got called Ronnie Shallady's boy, it just grated on me. So I wanted to go someplace where nobody knew my father and I could make my own way, and I did, and it was great. And so my dad and I were very, very good friends because I respected him for that decision. I know it was hard on his behalf, it was hard on my behalf, but it was absolutely the right thing that had to be done.
He's Scott Shellady. This is episode 2. We'll pick it up next episode. Maybe start with the birth of his daughter there in England, and we'll continue to tell the story of one goofy looking individual with a great story. Scott, thanks a lot.
No problem. Love it.
All right, till next time, see you later.